Good day and welcome back to another DBZ Dokkan battle video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the tankiest units in DBZ Dokkan battle. Another topical video talking about why they're the tankiest, what makes them the tankiest, and basically what you should be looking for when you are trying to determine whether a unit is a good tank. Now I'm ranking these characters across basically multiple styles of content, so whether it's basically the Festival Battles event, whether it is the Red Zone events, whether it's Formidable Foes, there's so much different content. So if a unit, for example, a Z rank tank in like 5, 6, 7 different forms of content, but is maybe like A rank in one, I'm going to try and balance it out. But generally speaking, this is just more a guide on which units are the tankiest and discussing a little bit what makes them tankiest. So let's talk about them. We'll just talk about them one by one. Let me talk through the rankings first, and then we'll just talk about the units one by one and very briefly cover what makes them tanky. So the rankings are as such. The 270th anniversary units are probably right there at the top. There's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the main reasons is the fact that in the first turn they have guard and 77% damage reduction, which is huge, and currently the rate at which they stack in terms of super attacks and defense means that they are very powerful. There are very few situations where they're not going to be incredibly tanky. If an event, say for example, starts with a 5 million crit, they can still survive that because of the 77% damage reduction. If an event, for example, starts with a 3 million super, they're fine. If they are allowed to progress and stack, they're really strong. Vegeta, very powerful unit, incredibly tanky, the combination of 60% damage reduction and guard. Vegeta is really powerful also because he has a really good team that can give him an extra 10% damage reduction. That can make him really good. Then we have Beast Gohan, still an incredibly good unit, but now is starting to suffer a little bit with the high levels of health that the bosses have, and it's starting to make the fights last a little bit longer, and you're starting to see that damage reduction that he has wear off, and that's starting to really show that there are situations where he can take quite a bit of damage. Broly, also somewhat similar, in that he is very good, but also has a little bit of drop off in that damage reduction, which can cause him some issues. Janemba is the exact opposite. Janemba starts almost a little bit too slow to be considered absolutely perfect as a tank or at the very top, but once fully built up, he is insane still. We'll talk about him just now. Then we have Goku, Super Saiyan Goku, really strong unit. I think maybe a little bit overestimated here, but I just really like him. I like how he functions. The fact that he stacks on 12 key is huge for him. How many additionals he can do and how quickly he can get there. Then we have a couple A tier units. So for me, you could very easily probably put this Vegeta up there and maybe put Frieza down here. I don't know. Goku, if an event has evasion available, he's still amazing. I don't think I've really ever seen him get hit. Obviously, if he does get hit, there are going to be events now that can cause him to take some damage, especially if it's like a first attack and he hasn't built up that additional defense, but he's still really good. Vegeta as well, he's thriving on that not getting hit immediately type of situation. But if you can get him hit once or twice before he has to take a super or something and he's built up his defense, he's more than fine. We're now finding situations where he can be caught out, but generally I'd still say he's a very reliable slot 1. Gotenks is completely different, similar to Beast Gohan, like in nature, got that kind of like short-term mega defense. His is that his big super defense is all RNG related, so that's kind of why I'd put him in the A rank. This Vegeta Daima is actually incredibly impressive for what he is. I think there's definitely a little bit of a restriction on him for longer events, but he is a ton of fun and actually is a surprisingly good tank. And honestly, I'd put this Goku in there, and I almost toyed with putting him at S. I think people underestimate how strong Goku actually is, like as a tanking unit, like how ridiculously quickly he stacks, how crazy his on-hit that defense gain is. His big issue is that crits are a bit of a problem for him, because he's a guard-reliant unit, but he's actually surprisingly incredibly tanky. Broly, with his active skill, is up there. He's basically the same thing as Vegeta. The problem is that his team just doesn't do huge damage, and his active skill is starting to wear out, even with 2 Brolys, and then he can take some damage. Frieza is the same thing as Goku, but the big hindrance with Frieza is A, team. So he's just not really got the team to cater to him right now. And B, he's reliant on his 18 key for those defensive stacks, which means he stacks, but just not as fast, and that's a big problem for him. Goku Frieza, I just stick here because actually a really good tanking unit. That one Rainbow Orb with Goku is insane, and can still make him ridiculous. And then you have SS3 Goku. Long events, terrible. But in a short-term event, this guy is still 100% perfectly good as a tank. So let's talk about what makes some of the units tanky, and discuss a little bit about what you're possibly looking for in terms of a tank. So, like if we look at the 70th anniversary LRs, you know, story is the same for both of them. The big damage reduction and guard for that first turn is huge. It basically makes them immune, I think, pretty much to all forms of damage right now in the game. So they're essentially great first shot tanks for turn 1. But then, unless they get sealed or something, chances are they're probably going to stack all the way up to like 1.2 million in one turn. And then, bam, they are a great tank throughout the rest of the event. Obviously, if you miss their stacks, or they don't stack, or they kill the boss too quick, or blah blah blah, like there is moments where they're not going to work, but then they have that added fallback of their transformations. So like Gogeta, obviously foreseeing more super attack nullification, huge damage reduction, and the Goku, the God Boys are the same. You know, they're just a little bit different. They got that evasion mechanism, but they are the same. They are absolutely huge. The next one is Vegeta Giant Ape. So massive unit. Damage reduction of 20%. More damage reduction of 40% as a first attacker. And guards all attacks. So that's 60% damage reduction. Guarding all attacks. After guard is activated, you know, that additional 60% defense. He's pushing like 700, 800k start of turn defense, which is huge. Then he also gets that 160% defense when attacking with 18 more ki. So after he supers, he's massively tanky as well. Just a very, very good unit. He is a little bit restricted to slot 1, but overall he's amazing. And you now have to be considerate of whether a unit is reliant on guard or whether they're reliant on damage reduction. We've seen with Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta that damage reduction alone with super low levels of defense is not enough, and especially in guarding situations. So when like Vegeta's taking on an AGL unit, he can still take a huge chunk of damage because the damage stats are just so high now. So damage reduction plus guard is huge. Damage reduction is still probably king now, because in crit situations you need damage reduction, not guard. So yeah, obviously yeah. So next we'll talk about the Gohan Beast and the Broly. So we'll talk about, you know, Tech Broly. So first turn, can't take any damage. 90% damage reduction, guards all attacks, or 70% damage reduction, guards all attacks. So first turn, can't take any damage. It's huge. Then when he transforms, that's when things, so 50% damage reduction is huge. It's really massive. Guards all attacks, 200% defense before attacking. So both are really, really good. His big issue is that his 20%, 26% additional damage reduction drops. 50% damage reduction and guard is very, very good. And Burly can have very solid defense. Burly's biggest issue is that before you used to be able to transform him and basically that was it. Like the event would end. Now the event's going a bit longer. He's actually losing that 20% damage reduction, and you're starting to see it show in some events. Not that he's not tanky still, but it went from, oh, he's tanking everything for like 50k to like, oh, he's tanking things for 400, 500k, which is just crazy to me. And then we have Gohan Beast. So Gohan Beast, the big thing with him is that, again, similar to Broly, he drops off. So he has that damage reduction when Ki is 24, very big. He's got guarding all attacks, very big. He has damage reduction of 40% for the first 5 turns. That's 60% damage reduction, which is great. After performing 5 or more attacks, he gets an additional 20% damage reduction. So there can be a stage where he has guard and like 80% damage reduction. And then after a certain point, after that 5 turns, he will drop down to guard and 40% damage reduction. That's huge. It's 10% less than Broly. Okay. Without the added additional defense before super. He's got 80% when receiving an attack, not 200 before super. And of course, events are longer now. Like I said, bosses have more health, so it is affecting him a little bit. Obviously, Frieza and Goku are very, very similar. Very, very similar in nature. Frieza is actually really quite tanky. Frieza, for example, can get up to 70% damage reduction. No, 50% damage reduction. So first attack in the turn, he has 30%. Then, 70%. Then he gets 20% from every attack received, so that's 50. And he's got a base 20, so he can have 70% damage reduction. He has no guard, so his big issue is that right now activating Big Bad Bosses, getting him to run at full power is a huge issue for him, and he stacks on his 18 key. So you can see here he stacks on his 18 key. It's a huge difference to Super Saiyan Goku, who doesn't have as high a damage reduction rate. It's got 20%, right? And then he's got 30% as first attacker. So he's only got 50%, but the rate at which he stacks his defense is way faster because he's got greatly raising defense on his 12 key and he's got on his 18 key. So he stacks defense way faster. It's much, much, much better for him. Then we talk about, like legendary Super Saiyan Broly, similar thing. As I mentioned before, his damage reduction rate is huge, 60%, but his guard is dependent on his domain being active. So when the domain is up and his guard is active, amazing. When his domain is not up, then it's a little bit difficult for him. It's just one of those things. Daima Vegeta, kind of want to talk about. Really, really impressive. I think a lot of people misread a lot of these passives, but 70% damage reduction is huge. 90% damage reduction for the first turn, so very, very tanky. After receiving an attack, 200%, and also he raises allies' defense. Vegeta's big problem is that brief chance of him potentially receiving an attack, that is a super attack, before his defense kicks in. If his defense kicks in, then he's pretty solid. There's going to be situations, yes, against certain strength enemies and things like that, where he is going to take a lot of damage, but he is surprisingly tanky, and it's because he's got that nice 70% chunky damage reduction and that 200% defense before super. He won't last super long, but he is really solid. Another unit that I kind of want to talk about is this Goku. On a lower tier level, very similar to the anniversary units, so very, very similar to them. Basically functions the same. So he's got that damage reduction rate of 40%, an additional 20% from his basic passive, which is huge. His big thing is this and this. So The 200% defense is big because it's when receiving an attack. So if Goku's got, say for example, 600k defense, his defense when receiving an attack shoots all the way up to like 1.4 million. Also post super, he has this 22% chance of evading the enemy's attack, and how it works is a bit different. So when it's a 22% chance of 100% evasion, and that sounds really weird to say, but basically every super attack he does has a chance to proc his evasion, and if it does, then he will evade all attacks, and that's very interesting. So he's actually super tanky. He also gets guard after performing 7 or more attacks, which if you've ever used Goku in any hard event is basically the second turn. Yeah, he's very good, and his stacking on his super is huge, and just in general he's really quite solid. Very, very good. So yeah, that kind of talks a lot about these units. I think you kind of get the gist. Look, I think when you're looking for tanky units, there's kind of like, I would say 4 key factors. Can they guard? Do they have damage reduction? Those are probably the 2 that lean the most at the top. Stacking defense, whether it's greatly raising defense, defense over multiple turns, raising defense on super, permanent or otherwise. And then 4th would be obviously evasion tanks. Do they have evasion? What's the level of evasion? I think a unit can be an evasive tank if their evasion levels are before, like hidden potential and everything, 60% or higher. There's a chance they can be a tank. If it's 70% or higher, they definitely can. Yes, RNG may not favor you, but I think overall it's a pretty good indicator. So yeah, I just want to special mention the Super Saiyan 3 Goku. He has 90% damage reduction and guard when there is a Majin Buu Saga ally in the same turn, which basically means he's immortal for like the first 2 turns, because he also builds his damage reduction rate up. He then obviously drops down, but for me he's really solid for shorter events, and I would not look past him overall. There was one more I wanted to talk about. Gotenks. So Gotenks is also very good. He's very similar to Vegeta, but a little bit more RNG basis. So he's also short term. Those first 5 turns, additional 22% damage reduction. There's a final trump card, that category ally. So that gives him 55% damage reduction, which is obviously very huge and very helpful. He doesn't have guard, which is his big problem, but it's really these that are like the big ones. So when receiving a super, high chance of defense, 77, so 50-50. And then when receiving a Ki Blast super, that 44% damage reduction, which would make him 77% damage reduction, which is huge. He can tank supers, he can tank things really well. He can start to take damage from normals, especially at 55%. And obviously there's a chance for his RNG to fail. And that's, probably not ideal. And then I just wanted to talk about Janemba, because like Janemba for me is a perfect example of a unit that on paper has everything, but it's the speed at which it comes that can cause some issues. So Janemba's great, guards all attacks, damage reduction 22%. He then builds up an additional damage reduction rate of 22% as a first or second attacker. So in total that's 44% damage reduction with guard, which is pretty good. He makes up for it a lot with these 2. So he has the great chance of nullifying Ki Blast supers and a high chance of evading supers. So he's good, like he's still very, very good. I think he can fully build up to like 1.6 million with guard with 40% damage reduction. He can tank a lot, Ki Blast nullification, evasion, so he is very good. Overall, I think for me, Janemba is a very impressive unit and a good example of a great tank. It's just going to depend. Some events are going to start up a bit too quickly for Janemba, but overall, I still think he's really good. That's my thoughts. Let me know what other units you think are super tanky. I'm sure everyone can see Beerus down here, and I'm very happy to add Beerus in at like B. There are also some great units that are super tanky after super. So for example, if you look at like the GT boys, those units are great after super, but I wanted to avoid units that were too conditional and just focus on units that could tank amazingly and obviously are great pretty much almost immediately, or at least very quickly. But yeah, that's it from me. See you guys next time. Bye.